but we're still hoping to get back to our community. So this is an honorable chain of events, but one that I'm still very proud of. American athletics, football in particular, it's tied very closely to psychiatry and neurology. The research that's been conducted in psychiatry has affected the rules of the game to the point where you're changing gameplay at every level, college, professional, high school. So it's, again, a privilege here to be here and to speak to you, people who are so influential in the sports that we're interested in. Now, the analogy that I like to use is visualization experiment, right? So, based on recommendations from psychiatric and neurologic societies, football players have reduced the amount of collisions that they take in practice, just preservation of the brain. And families love it, players love it, everybody loves that. But what you're asked to do is to just visualize constantly the motions you're going to go through during a game. And after doing that time and time again, you get to a point where American people are going to bet thousands of dollars on the fact that you're going to be able to execute that strategy that you used in your brain again and again. So I want this space to be kind of similar to that, where we're going to take a step into an escalated clinical climate, a very traumatic experience, and hopefully, as all the psychiatrists here are faced with an experience like that, either directly or indirectly, you'll be able to remember this experience of thinking of how actions are going to affect your patient's life in the long run and the trauma that they may have to go through in recovery of that process. Okay, so again, this is not it's really a difficult presentation to deliver. Matt's worked tirelessly to escape circuitous logic, escaping the credibility stigmata that come with being admitted psychiatrically. And we're hoping that we can enter this in a way that we can grow together. Now, if we want to think about this from a psychiatric perspective, intellectualization, it's a level 6 neurotic defense mechanism, and you may want to think about that as we are hearing this story. But what we're doing here is we're transitioning that to level 7, which is a mature defense mechanism, and that would be affiliation and altruism. Because what Matt's doing here is really affiliating with the psychiatric community and trying to find ways to better healthcare for everyone who's going through psychiatric changes or psychiatric challenges. So what we're really doing is reflecting the title of our piece here, turning trauma into a power source for change. Although this presentation is brought to you by former athletes, it's not only about athletes. It's about supporting vulnerable populations everywhere, and I hope you enjoy it. So, Matt, who I've been speaking about, he's a former professional football player who's become a fierce advocate, founding a nonprofit for healthcare reform following traumatic experiences in a mental health facility. His work has been centered around researching current policy and holding eye-opening discussions with leaders of healthcare in Massachusetts, New York, California. He'll discuss his traumatic experiences in the healthcare system during his peak playing window as a college athlete, and the downstream effects on his personal, professional, and social life. He'll also touch upon his experience of navigating an episodic crisis and his team's response to his transparency in those moments. Finally, he'll stress the critical need for improved accessibility to high-quality mental health resources in the athletic environment. Matt's currently applying to law school, where he'll seek to further his impact and advocacy in this realm. Next I have here Dr. Samuel Jackson. He's the co-director of public psychiatry education at SUNY Downstate and a Columbia Public Psychiatry Fellow. He's also a contributor to the roadmap to the ideal crisis system, which are national guidelines for improving behavioral health crisis systems. He's become an expert in the mental health crisis responses area, and he supported family members experiencing several adverse outcomes of inadequate mental health crisis interventions. He and his colleagues at Emory University have piloted research to discover training algorithms with the potential of eliminating incidents of restraint and seclusion in the psychiatric inpatient units. The following speakers were not able to come with us today, so what we did is kind of an informal interview with them online. We'll be able to display those interviews on our prompter right here. Among that list is Shane Waldron, who is one of Matt's former coaches at UMass. He's the current Seattle Seahawks offensive coordinator. And he'll be able to speak about how his job has led him to be an expert in character evaluation and talent management. He'll speak about cultivating professional safety and provide a coach and mentor's perspective on supporting players battling with mental illness. He'll highlight some successful outcomes as well as experiences of ineffectiveness. And I believe that his rarely heard perspective as a coach at the pinnacle of athletic prowess will highlight barriers in a resource-rich population. Isabella is another one of our panelists, and he's going to also call in. He's a current Buffalo Bills wide receiver, and he was the team captain while Matt was playing at UMass. He'll discuss his role as a friend and a supporter and a teammate as Matt navigated his mental illness. He'll talk about how the team responded to Matt in that time, and he'll also talk about his personal experience with mental illness in the NFL space. Finally, we have Elyn Sachs, who is also going to be calling in. I'm really upset we couldn't get a live stream of her because she's really great. It was an awesome privilege to talk to her. But she's an associate dean professor of law, psychology, psychiatry, and behavioral sciences at USC Gold, who's won a MacArthur Award for her work in mental health care advocacy space. Her best-known literary contributions discuss life with schizophrenia, the ethics of forced treatment in the mentally ill, and the limits of psychoanalysis. She'll recount some of her experiences living with mental illness and navigating the healthcare system, and she'll also discuss legal perspectives on the implementation of public safety initiatives. Elyn's currently working to increase autonomy within the shared decision-making space and advanced directive processes. So, before I get to Matt, I want to talk about a few concepts here, and we're going to begin with epistemic justice. So epistemic justice is a form of social injustice that occurs when people's authority as a knower is ignored, dismissed, or marginalized. So this is a term that's familiar to many who have studied philosophy or critical race theory, in which the oppressed are incapable of restructuring intolerable systems despite every effort made to enter the executive conversation. In an industry proud of its scientific knowledge, this is a tool of exclusion for those who argue with other forms of knowledge. It is a concept that may illustrate many interactions between patients and physicians in both directions. Perhaps a doctor rejecting the possibility that a patient may have knowledge about equitable practice, or a patient using sociological biases to reject the idea that the doctor may have a clear view of their illness. The root of this concept is really a false belief that anybody possesses the ability to determine who has knowledge. But we do this haphazardly all the time. The act of dismissing an individual's authority as a knower implies knowledge of the entirety of that individual's mental capacity, and it erases the voices that we desperately seek to hear. But we barely know limits of our own knowledge, so how can we say where the limits of somebody else's knowledge are? So I think it's important to keep that in mind as we unravel this patient experience, which is riddled with bias-driven behavior. In this setting, we require an assumption of knowledge possessed by our storytellers. Our team here, we were initially formed around racial tensions surrounding the murder of George Floyd. At that time, the police were really exposed for a lot of malpractice, so to speak, due to body-worn cameras. And we were suddenly faced with this irrefutable evidence that the marginalization of opinions of vulnerable populations has allowed atrocious behaviors to transpire unopposed, right? And we realized that these power dynamics regularly exist in every vulnerable community, including the mentally unstable, critical, or ill. So we begin to discuss efforts to bring about similar justice in the medical world, a space that's revered for its ability to protect information. Little to no efforts have been made to encourage similar transparency in psychiatric settings. Although medical records in some states are readily available for consumers, written documentation rarely tells the entire story, and not every encounter is documented. Not every encounter is documented honestly. And in the setting of psychiatry, these encounters are the primary intervention. So this is somewhat of a problem. I don't believe that any interaction in the medical space should be undocumented, especially if it has therapeutic value. While many efforts have been made to study these transactions, especially in categories of race and gender dynamics, we can point to evaluations of restraining and sedation rates based on gender or race. We can point to reports of inequitable schizophrenia or bipolar diagnoses determined by race and gender again. But the conclusions are almost always inconsequential due to the fact that the process behind each of these decisions can't be documented. But we know that the differences are embedded in medical training and policy. So body-worn cameras are an interesting idea. They're an interesting intervention that are beginning to be explored in emergency department settings. They allow for interpretation of patient interactions, presentations, and theoretically produce opportunities for procedural and restorative justice. We explored these devices as possible psychiatric interventions. However, the efficacy just has not been backed by a significant body of evidence, either in the police space or in the medical space. So if you are somebody who is looking into these things, I want to make sure that we go over a few questions and pose them so you can think about them when you leave, right? How are cases of mistreatment and mispractice reviewed? By whom are cases of mistreatment and malpractice reviewed? Will the same biases that initially led to misconduct also be present in the opinions of those reviewers? And how is a newly surveilled workforce now managed and trained to protect the patients under a critically transparent eye? I think Sam will speak to that. Okay. Now, Matt's experience speaks to a problem that supersedes disparities of gender and race. His experience is one that really affects all vulnerable populations in the psychiatric space. We hope that the impact of this experience can motivate our listeners to begin implementing skillfully constructed training and response systems to mitigate unusual encounters of unnecessary use of clinical force. And we hope that this will inspire you to engage in public conversations about the systemic causes of unnecessary violence and aggression in the psychiatric treatment unit. I'll leave you with a quote. Psychology is a conceptual apparatus that now functions as one of the most important disciplinary mechanisms in contemporary neoliberal society. It provides and furnishes dominant models of the self in which much of the English-speaking world It provides and furnishes dominant models of the self in much of the English-speaking world, and it operates as a moral compass for how we should make sense of our behavior, our thoughts, and our sentiments. That's a quote from Foucault. So psychiatrists here are the ethical leaders of healthcare policy. I really believe that. So we hope to support ethical growth in this space by bringing forward a direct patient interaction and lead to initiatives which we can affiliate with for the betterment of care in our practice community. With that, I'd like to invite Matt to the stage to tell his gripping and emotional story.
Thanks, Dewey. I really appreciate it. Without Dewey, our group isn't here today. We wouldn't have the kind of traction where our voice is getting a bit more attention. And Dewey's the reason we found Sam. He sent me an article after we'd organized the group that was founded in wake of the story I'm telling today. That Sam wrote in the Psychiatric Times about making the case for investing in non-police response and crisis intervention, and I was kind of like, okay, that's one of the psychiatrists I can work with. And then Amy Porphyry put me in touch with him, and we're off the races from there. So thank you to her, and thank you to Dr. Art Williams for taking the letter from Elyn Sachs and Sam that talked about my group, what we're trying to accomplish, and how they felt strongly that I and we have something meaningfully to contribute to the field of psychiatry. And lastly, thank you to all you guys for coming through today. I think one of the biggest problems in my lived experience and pain points in various facets of my life has come from a lack of transparency and being misunderstood. And this is an excellent opportunity to directly deliver to people who are in positions of authority in the field transparency that can hopefully lead to a more accurate understanding of me and many people like me. The story I'm telling today is a story that started Matt's mission. It's a group oriented towards turning this trauma into a power source for change, and it's surely the worst thing that's ever happened in my life. But I think a football quote, even if throwaway, God says ops, not oops, meaning when things go awry, you have an option in terms of how you respond, and this is a directly potent opportunity to make the world a better place. So with that, I'm going to get into my story of lived experience and of the series of events which were very deleterious and which we hope to eradicate from the system. Slides. So, I had a lot of privilege growing up. I grew up in a two-parent, middle-class family home, and was the first child in my family. Really didn't seem to have any issues when I was coming up. I, would get straight A's and play 4 sports, and all as well. We didn't know anything about mental illness. Looking back on it, my diagnosis of OCD, prayers in church or different phobias did seem to manifest. But it was all, sunshine and rainbows until I turned about age 15. And at that time, sudden and severe symptoms of OCD came on. Thank God I had my parents who were relentless, quick to say, Matt's not himself, and we're not going to stop until we get back to, until we get our son back. However, our experience from the jump potentially forecasted some of the events I'm talking about today, in that very immediately I was exposed to trauma when navigating the mental health care system. They brought me to a place called Westwood Lodge, and first time I went in, I just remember thinking, what the heck happened to my life? Because the picture perfect trajectory that I'd had at that time, suddenly I was wearing colored hospital garments and in the basement of that hospital, and there were a lot of disturbing things that happened pretty quickly. I had sat down and I saw chemical restraint within the first 15 minutes of being in there. A young man, I don't know what issues he was dealing with, took off his clothes and said, "Welcome the new guy," and he jumped on the table. And they chemically restrained him right in front of me, and I didn't realize from an optics of what psychiatry is all about standpoint how mistrust was started very early for me. For about 2 years I was limited, but doing a bit better. Still not myself prior to the onset of mental illness, until I turned I was 17, and in the summer of 2009, Dr. Elyn Stewart kind of came out of the blue. She called my parents, and had her Canadian voice. I was like, "Oh no, yeah, sure, it's OCD. Come on, bring her in." And we went in, and she persisted to get through to my most visceral fears, wounds, and emotions. And to say we flipped the script was an understatement. The second picture depicts 6 months after I was inappropriately hospitalized in an adolescent residential treatment and missing some of my junior year of high school. I was misdiagnosed at that time, and to go from being psychiatrically hospitalized to back onto on a roll and helping my high school team go to the state championship seemed to be a pretty uplifting narrative in terms of how psychiatry can go. My relationship with that physician was great, and really it's one of the reasons that, despite what we're going to talk about, I'm not anti-psychiatry. From there, I continued to have quality care she passed me off to an excellent physician at the same hospital who I worked with from ages 18 to 22. By the time I was 22, it seemed like mental illness was a footnote in my life. I was an academic all-conference, fully scholarship Division I athlete at the University of Massachusetts, who attended staff of coaches depicted to have a healthy career in the NFL as a fullback. That isn't to say that I didn't struggle with OCD during that time period, and that isn't to say that I got the right treatment at the right time on the psychology side. Heading into that 2014 season, so about 10 years ago, I was struggling with performance anxiety. You play games at Penn State or something like that, and there's 99,800 fans in the stand. You can hardly hear the quarterback in the huddle. A lot of guys can't hold their water, even if they don't have an anxiety disorder. And so it exacerbated some of the symptoms of my OCD. And I wanted to work to minimize that. So I headed to the OCD Institute at McLean's Hospital and approached it just like any other problem. I was going to work to minimize the role it plays in my life and get on top of the condition so that I could realize my trajectory. Unfortunately, the course of treatment was overly aggressive. We know now, but what they had me doing was reading aggressive exposure scripts for 4 hours a day. It was around trying a phobia of losing my identity. And I understand how if OCDs, or if ERP is implemented properly, can yield great results. But a young psychologist who knew not what he was doing and who I've since forgiven in my own heart, had prescribed writing scripts about the worst things I could think about my identity, reading them, bathing in them. So the extent of I'm a piece of shit, I'm a loser, I'm a faggot, these scripts were saying these things. And then I was to sit in it and bathe in it without assuring myself that that I wasn't those things. It was so aggressive in terms of things not going well that I became a bit depressed. And during that season that I'm talking about, the young psychologist had thought it would be a cool case study to be working with me and be continuing the ERP informally for a couple calls a week outside of clinical parameters, and kept doubling down on the aggressive ERP treatment, even though I wasn't responding well. I remember crying, sitting in my car thinking like, I may be performing well, I'm not ritualizing, but I feel empty inside. I feel really sad, I feel numb often. And he said, well, you're not going to get me to say stepping away from this treatment is going to be a good thing for your mental health, and I followed and I listened. At the end of the season, even though I performed well, I was struggling internally, and we tried to get the appropriate help from the folks at the OCD Institute, and couldn't access what we needed when we needed it. Heading into the 2015 year, I was really struggling. I was fortunate enough to have some coaches that were willing to try to help me out or treat it like any other injury. It's very innovative UMass scholarship online classes so that I could stay eligible with the NCAA. And we were pretty transparent. I stepped in front of my whole team in March of 2015 to say, hey boys, you guys know I got OCD and I work real hard to minimize the role that it plays in my life. I'm going to be stepping away for the summer to get some treatment, but I'll see you week 1 versus Colorado or 2 versus Notre Dame. And looking back, I didn't realize how rare it was that I left on a standing ovation and had to respect my teammates despite the circumstances. But unfortunately, my family and I realized pretty quickly just how ugly and broken the mental health care system can be. Instead of offering trauma-informed care or accounting for trauma in the process, they doubled down on the over-aggressive ERP, and it made me very unwell. When I became depressed and I voiced that, I was labeled by a program director who we'll just call Nurse Ratchet, that I was intimidating. Shortly after, I was kicked out of the institute as not a fit. In that meeting, my mother, my father, and I talked about how, hey, this is the same hospital that some of your previous psychiatrists have asked Matt to mentor adolescent male athletes with OCD as a favor. Same hospital when one of your adolescent psychiatrists in 2009, Ben Mulbert, tragically passed and fell overboard. We had him offer a testimony to put in his memorial process. He's been an advocate and helpful to your hospital when you needed him, and now when he needs you, you're giving him a course of treatment that's making him unwell, and then you're just kicking him out. And I looked at that woman and I said, I've done everything I can to try to follow this young psychologist's treatment, and the fact that now that I'm worse, you're kicking me out without any solution, you're in the wrong business. Her face panged with rage, and then she said, you're dismissed. During that time that I left, a really good psychiatrist that I mentioned took a high-paying job, maybe not a high-paying, a very important job in the APA. And I was passed off to a really not good psychiatrist who I saw for 20 minutes every 6 weeks. From a fit or partial fit, we weren't right for each other. I remember her talking about how she spent a whole 20-minute session talking about how my insisting to hold the door open for her was misogynistic rather than discussing the logistics of the benzodiazepines that she was shoveling in my direction. So in that vulnerable space, I got up to 7-8 milligrams of Ativan a day, and I was really unwell. Concurrently, the young psychologist, he had previously asked me not to sue. I didn't know if that was standard or what. I was an impressionable, vulnerable 22-year-old. He passed me off to a young social worker who was his friend, and he spent most of our sessions. He said he was learning DBT and was going to try it, but he wasn't DBT certified or trained. And he spent a lot of our sessions talking about how, please don't sue my buddy Dr. So-and-so. I struggled mightily with the shame because instead of joining my teammates week 1 versus Colorado or week 2 versus Notre Dame in 2015, I was in the fetal position in my parents' basement sweating out benzos, watching the game on TV. An article came out in one of the Amherst newspapers that was like, Tuleja stepping away with personal issues. The girl I was dating was like, what's so personal you can't talk to me about? And, I was without care or access to an appropriate solution that I felt would have been the responsible move by the hospital when I didn't respond to the inappropriately aggressive OCD treatment. As time went on, I was seeking resolve for having been pushed so hard with that ERP treatment. Informally, I may add, with these treatments outside of clinical parameters. And I wanted to ensure that these things couldn't happen to somebody else. I was upset about how much I'd lost, and when I tried talking about this in therapy, the social worker would just say, well, just don't sue or try to get me to cope with it rather than having some sort of feasible solution to being wronged. And so I tried reaching out to the psychiatrist who I didn't know that well, had only seen 7 or 8 times. Don't misquote me on the number, but she didn't know me well. And tried to say, hey, could you evaluate the treatment that was done there? Because I think it was really wrong. And she just said, no, I tried to talk to staff here at MGH, and they said that McLean's is a sisterhood hospital. And effectively, we're not going to do anything about it. So I made a less than optimally mature decision on the 9th of December 2015, a date that derailed my trajectory as a young man and scarred my family and my community for so many years. and is at root of what we're trying to eradicate as a group. I wanted to seek out a closure conversation and treat the gripe I had with the unit psychologist the same way I would a player or a coach who I had an issue with, and I began driving towards the hospital and had my father call nurse Ratchet #1, and he said, Matt's coming by to try to have a closure conversation with Dr. So-and-so. She said, no, absolutely not. If he comes by, he'll be detained by security until the police get here, and then he'll be arrested. My dad relayed that to me, and I said, well, that's crazy, not at all what I'm looking for. I was in no way, shape, or form a threat. I'd never hit anybody off the football field, and that's not in my character whatsoever. So, I stopped the car and pulled into a Dunkin' Donuts and just was sitting with my feelings, and my uncle who lived in the area came by and we talked and went back to my place. The series of events in terms of the hospitals talking with one another is unclear. We still don't have answers despite all our complaints and cries for help. We got a call from that psychiatrist that I didn't know well, and she told my father, bring him into the ER to be psychiatrically evaluated, or we'll section him, send the police into your home and take him. And we were terrified. We had no idea what our rights were. I was in the most vulnerable position of my life. I was addicted to benzos. I was not at all myself from a mental health standpoint. And my dad said, Matt, you had good providers at that hospital in the past. One of them asked you to be a speaker at the MGH 2014 Adolescent Psychiatric Conference, which is an honor. While not directly stated, I figured that was because I was a Division I athlete who was an outspoken mental health advocate. We went in, and when we went in, it was very eerie and sci-fi. There was much like when I was 15 years old at Westwood Lodge, they have the colored garments and no shoes, just socks, and there's a psych wing in the corner. And we went in, and there was one security guard there. It was me and my dad, and a young resident came in who seemed disheveled. I won't try to mentalize or know what she was thinking, but my impression at the time was that she was probably more preoccupied with her other priorities than the psych eval. And she just asked me to take medication. She just said, would you take Benadryl or lorazepam? And me being articulate and clear about how things were going in the wrong direction, I said, no, I'm not willing to do that, but I'm happy to comply with any testing to assure you that I'm not a threat to myself or anybody else. That's really all I said, and then she left. 30 minutes or so, came back, same thing, we'd like you to take medication. Same song and dance, comes back again after a period of time, we'd like you to take medication. And then on the fourth time, roughly, she came back, and what happened next really caused me a tremendous amount of damage. And the tech team cut out during this portion of our presentation, but I figured it was important for you to hear it from my mouth. As I said, what happened next caused me, and by extension my family and community, a tremendous amount of damage. We're still scarred by it, and much of my life's energy and resources have gone into working to heal from this. That young ER resident asked my father to step down the hall to fill out some paperwork. My father said, why? Is that going to help Matt get seen by who he needs to be seen by? She said yes. And trusting her, he followed her down the hall through large shuttered doors. And while he was doing that, he started texting the MGH psychiatrist who he didn't know well, saying, the young ER resident just asked me to step down the hall to fill out some paperwork. It seems like something kind of strange is going on. Why are they doing this? After a moment when the young ER resident and my father were standing down the hall, and he had a clipboard, the ER doctor looked at my dad, and that woman said, oh, and one more thing. Popped back through the doors, and as she was doing it, she said, I'll be right back. My dad was a bit confused and waiting for the response from the psychiatrist. Those doors closed behind that young ER doc and locked my father out. That doctor then returned to the room that I was in with 9 men. We're trying to read body language in football, and they were looking at me as if I was a school shooter or a doctor killer. They had dilated pupils, tense, gnarling white knuckles, and were clearly seeing red. At which point, she began instructing me on her plans. She said, not only are you going to take medication, you're going to take Haldol lorazepam injected in your pelvis while you're cuffed by the wrist and ankle of that gurney over there. I said, whoa, you've got this really messed up. I came in as a courtesy. They said they weren't sectioning me. I told you I'm not a threat to myself or anybody else, so I'm happy to comply with any testing. The treatment hasn't been going well, but I didn't do anything to warrant this. I made no direct threats. I did not come across as psychotic or manic or anything that would warrant any level of response like that. After trying to de-escalate with this young doctor several which ways, including trying to negotiate to take Benadryl or something to that effect, given that part of my OCD is affect phobia, specifically a phobia of not being able to feel any emotion at all, she denied all of my requests. During this horrifying standoff, one of the security guards began crying, like visibly crying. He goes, guys, can't you see this big kid? Don't let the system win. He looked at me, he goes, don't let the system win. I then blessed myself and started saying the Our Father. I backed in the corner, looked at the camera in the upper left, and the last thing they said to me was, if you strike any of us, you'll be held legally accountable, which I think is a cowardly thing to say to somebody who you're about to unlawfully attempt to claim authority over their bodily autonomy. The 2 security guards with mace shouted at the crying security guard to get out of the way, and they let the mace fly. They maced him, they maced me, and I attempted to run out of there like an NFL running back, not to strike anyone, but to escape for safety. I did not succeed. I was maced on my eyes, my chest, and my genitalia, and those 9 men beat the shit out of me. They stomped on me such that I couldn't feel sensation down the IT band of my right leg for 18 months. When my shoulder was about to pop out, I had a moment where I thought, all these people are going to lose their jobs for doing this. There's nothing decent or legal about it, and this was a pain point in trauma therapy. I went along with it, and they started saying, are you going to be a good boy, or are you going to be a good boy? As my shoulder was about to pop out, I screamed, I want the tape, I want the tape, I want the tape. The security guard that was crying said, I'm going to go check for the tape, son. When they succeeded in physically and chemically restraining me, which was a process of pulling my pants down and shoving a very large needle into my hip 3 times before hitting the vein, I began panicking. And for those of you who are not familiar with panic attacks, it was much like, oh. At which the security guards began laughing and clapping. The security guard that was crying told them to stop laughing and clapping. I was then pushed into a dark room where I had mace on my genitalia for over 2.5 hours. A nurse came in and told me to quit crying like a big baby, that I brought it upon myself, which is a microcosm of Satanism in America. After about 2 hours, it was older, a nurse came in and said, now I don't want you to do anything stupid. He let me out of the restraints, and my dad came in. I saw him cry for the 3rd time in my life with tears in his eyes. He said, my boy, what'd you do to my boy? I then showered and got the mace off my eyes, chest, and genitalia. They had no available bedrooms, apparently. And I went to Pembroke Hospital, where I was there for not very long at all, perhaps a day or 2. And the head psychiatrist said, we're so sorry that happened to Matt. that particular hospital has built up a reputation for expediting the physical and chemical restraint of patients in question for logistical convenience of their emergency room. Matt's clearly not a threat to himself or anybody else, and there's no reason for him to be here. We went home, and like clockwork, Nurse Ratchet #1 had driven a piece of priority mail that said, I am persona non grata, which in Latin translates to you're unpopular and unaccepted and unable to get health care at the institution with majority of the competent providers during a time period that just so happened to be my peak playing window as an NFL prospect. So effectively, I had a condition and an illness that I tried and worked really hard to minimize so I could realize my potential. I got in with a psychologist who made a mistake and handled things poorly. And when I followed those instructions and was made unwell, I was kicked out and labeled intimidating. And then told not to sue several different ways as an impressionable 22, 23-year-old. And when I tried to seek alternative means to have closure on the situation, I was coerced, isolated, and sadistically tortured in an emergency room and dealt more psychophysiological damage than I ever could have bargained for. No human brain is built to habituate to that level of helplessness and powerlessness, and it's nearly a guaranteed sentence of nightmares for years to come. And then after all that, I was sent that letter that day, and I watched my parents cry, and I made the toughest decision of my life to not seek to do to them as they had done to me, or take the easy way out and take my own life, but rather God blessed me with a great family and group of friends, and even though I was numb and seemingly hopeless, I wanted to be around for them and set a standard that my family would be proud of, regardless of what we've been through. I proceeded to interview a dozen singular doctors in the Boston area to seek to help me titrate up the benzodiazepines that I've been made addicted to, who were outside of the Mass General McLean's umbrella. Coach Whip stayed in touch every month and was like, hey, you can come back when you're healthy. But we weren't talking about a knee or a shoulder. He's like, you can still play in the league if you're healthy. After doing different forms of therapy that wasn't super effective or optimal, and slowly working back into being able to trust people in the space. That's actually a particular bruise. It's one of 8. My mom just sent that because she had it on her phone and she keeps it to remember the incident. But that was from a heel of a security guard in that emergency room. Excuse me. This was the persona non grata letter, and a letter from that my dad tried to write to the McLeans to say, hey, I think things were handled poorly and you should allow Matt back in and I'd be happy to talk. We got a letter from the president and vice president denying any lifting of the persona non grata. The social scene was sort of like, where the heck did Matt go? What happened to him? But in 2017, in mid-October, I returned to UMass on a hardship waiver. I was not really myself because I was super traumatized, and when I was playing football, I was having thoughts about the defense pulling my pants down or shoving a needle in me, as opposed to thinking about my assignment and being able to tolerate the bodily sensations of anxiousness without getting fight or flight. Along the way, I should actually preface that, I'm sorry. At the end of the season, Coach Webb said, hey, you can still play in the league if you're healthy, even though I didn't have a great 6 weeks at UMass, and I set out on a path, less travel, played in developmental professional leagues, like the Arena Football League and a couple developmental leagues that crashed when their owner was in the hole and they were trying to make the league supplemental to the NFL, camps in the XFL and AAF. And along the way, this was a very transparent situation that everybody was, I remember a personnel director for the XFL who was Moose Johnston. He was a Dallas Cowboy. He was like, hey, so Tuleja, this isn't 2021. You're a good player, rugged with size, but we were looking at your CV like, where the heck were you in 2015 and 16? And when you came back, why weren't you the same guy for a bit? And since I had nothing to lose, I exhausted transparency like I am to you today, and to say he went to bat for me is an understatement. He hired an agent who has no business representing a penny stock guy that didn't get drafted, and he encouraged me to long snap, and in that way I was able to finish my career on my terms in 2023, in that I was able to sign 3 professional contracts prior to retiring, and my personal win that gave me peace was that I was able to perform and try out and have workouts with these NFL teams when it was hot in the kitchen and anxiety inducing without my mind going back to that emergency room. Along the way, our friends from different walks of life came together and formed a group called Matt's Mission, which is a patient advocacy group rooted in transparency. Our organization exists to counter the plague of mistreatment in psychiatry, advance inequities in the field of mental health care, and empower the patient. We're a highly motivated group, and we also partnered with Elyn and some good psychiatrists like Sam Jackson here. Community, after hearing my story, came to have my back, and we raised a good amount of money right off the bat to work towards solving some of these problems. We did some research with Elyn Sachs and the Sachs Institute of Mental Health Law and Dr. Sam Jackson to come up with innovative ways to ensure that what happened to me can't happen to another patient again. And with that, I'll say that we got it wrong with me. And we can't go back. But what we can do is learn from these experiences to ensure that it can't happen to another patient again. And then listening, you can hold stories like this such that you can get it right. I'll offer actionable items at the end in terms of a call to action. But in the meantime, I believe that the most successful people in history are those who are most able to improvise and collaborate. And so I'll give the mic to some of the people that have reached out to support us from different angles, including one of my UMass coaches, Waldron. Thank you.
Group in New York City, one of the largest in the country, serving people experiencing homelessness. I'm a former APA Public Psychiatry Fellow, and like to be said, I'm a part of a think tank called the Group for the Advancement of Psychiatry, where we wrote national guidelines for crisis care. Although that is my background, I'm not representing any of these groups today. I'm here on behalf of Matt and our group, Matt's Mission. I want to start by talking about how I got involved. It mirrors actually exactly what Matt was saying. In 2021, I wrote an article about my uncle who had passed away. He had schizophrenia, experienced homelessness for many years, and was shot by police in the year 2000. In the article, I advocated for non-police crisis response. I talked about the fear that the family members of my patients faced when they considered calling 911 during a mental health emergency, and how they would wait until their son or daughter's illness became more life-threatening than calling for help. I argued that this structural violence had not only eroded the trust in our healthcare system, it had prevented people from getting treatment at all. Recognizing a kindred spirit, Matt in his resourceful way tracked me down and told me his harrowing story like he did with you all today. In hearing his story, I was initially disturbed. Then, at some point, if I'm being honest, a bit defensive, feeling the need to explain why it's necessary at times to use restraints, while distancing myself for how they used mace on him and these other malicious ridicule that he experienced. However, eventually, and I think this is where I'm at now in thinking about Matt's story, I started questioning this idea that putting people in restraints and seclusion is just part of the job. On weekends, I moonlight in CPEPs, which is New York City Psychiatric Emergency Rooms, and sometimes I still order restraints. But in a very powerful way, I believe that Matt, in telling his story, puts a mirror in front of all of us, allowing us to focus on some of the ugliest aspects of our work. While working in the streets, subways, and shelters with people with serious mental illness and substance use disorders, it's not terribly uncommon for me to hear similar stories to Matt's. That my patients are afraid of going to the hospital because they worry that they'll be trapped, imprisoned, they'll say, restrained and sedated. And I've been wondering, much like the fear that the families of my patients have about police response to mental health crisis, that the structural violence in our own hospitals not only erode the trust of our patients, but in some cases prevents them from getting treatment at all, like I see in the shelters. So is the use of restraints and seclusion a normal or necessary part of our work? In the 90s, a literature review on this exact subject concluded that, quote, it was impossible to run a program for the seriously ill without the use of these restrictive interventions, end quote. Also in the 90s, however, I would add, 50 to 150 people died each year because of the use of seclusion or restraints. In 2012, the American Association for Emergency Psychiatry convened a team called Project Beta, which it's possible people in this room are on. Project Beta stood for Best Practices in Evaluation and Treatment of Agitation. And this team took a more critical view on the use of restraint, acknowledging that the physical and psychological harm to patients, ultimately stating that, quote, while it may not be possible to eliminate the incidence of restraint and seclusion, much more can be done to reduce its use. They also said that this collective effort of reducing restraints may simultaneously, and perhaps counterintuitively to some, reduce staff injuries, because as many as 2/3 of staff injuries occur during this restraint and seclusion process. The authors added that patients who have not been restrained and forcibly medicated during an emergency department are in fact less likely to mistrust and fear going to the hospital and more comfortable seeking assistance in the future, echoing the exact sentiments of my patients in the shelters. Most recently, SAMHSA stated, quote, the culture must change from one in which seclusion and restraint are viewed as positive and therapeutic to one in which they are regarded as violent acts that result in traumatization to patients, observers, and others, end quote. Indeed, efforts have been made to reduce the use of restraints. A large study, which included 9 Pennsylvania state hospitals, over the course of an 11-year period, showed a reduction in their use of restraints by 2/3 of it. And one state hospital within the system had no restraints for 2 years. Data showed that although restraints and seclusions were reduced or eliminated, staff were not at an increased risk of assault. The authors noted that one critical component of their success was leadership buy-in, that their administration recognized that, quote, seclusion and restraint are not treatment modalities, but treatment failures. A similarly successful effort at Emory and Grady Memorial Hospital in Georgia, led by my colleague, Dr. Kotez, who may be in the room as well. If you are, raise your hand. If not, I'm going to share his information. He's amazing. They were able to reduce incidents of seclusion and restraint from about 20 incidents per month to 0, again for about 2 years. Their multi-pronged effort was guided by a NASHBID, which is the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors, white paper that they wrote, outlining 6 core strategies for reducing seclusion and restraint. At the top of the list, again, is leadership. As a mandatory core intervention, senior leadership, including the CEO and COO, must be consistently and continuously involved. They're responsible for initiating a culture change by defining and articulating a vision that expects seclusion and restraint reduction or elimination, developing and implementing a targeted facility or unit-based performance improvement plan and holding people accountable to that plan. Senior leadership must be involved in direct oversight of each seclusion and restraint event 24/7 to investigate causality, review facility procedures that may have facilitated the event, and to explore and impress upon their staff the importance of alternatives. I won't go into detail into all the 6 core competencies, which very briefly include the use of data, workforce development, the use of prevention tools, and debriefing after every event. But I do want to highlight their last mandatory core intervention, which is the use of consumers that they define as people with lived experience, their families, and community advocates like Coach Waldron, which we'll hear in a little bit, in various roles and levels throughout the organization to assist in the reduction of seclusion and restraint. The RDB included the consumers and people with lived experience in restraint and seclusion event oversight, monitoring, the debriefing interviews, peer support services, of course, and it mandates significant roles of consumers in key facility committees. It also outlines important protections and supervision standards for consumer involvement, acknowledging the power dynamics and difficulties assimilating in these roles. This Nashgood white paper, which is referenced widely and whose 6 core strategies have been incorporated in many successful efforts to reduce the use of restraints, was published in 2006. I point that out because as I've reviewed the literature for this talk and present some of it for you today, I realized that it's not as much about innovation, coming up with new tools to reduce the use of restraint, but rather motivation, our collective will to address this ugly aspect of our work. And that's where I want to come back to the potential power of Matt's story and Matt's mission. Solutions exist to reduce and eliminate the violent and traumatic practices of seclusion and restraint, but it will require us to prioritize this effort as an issue worthy of our time, money, and commitment. I hope that by hearing Matt's story, you feel moved and motivated as a leader in your community to write about this, reflect on your own participation in structural violence, initiate the culture change, and importantly, invite people with lived experience, their families, and community advocates to have a seat at the table. Thank you for your time and attention.
So I did my law review note, which is a student article for the Yale Law Journal on, it's called The Use of Mechanical Restraints in Psychiatric Hospitals. And I went to one of my professors who was also a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst at the law school and said I was writing my note on restraints and these must be very painful and degrading. And I did not self-disclose, didn't have the courage to self-disclose at that time. He said, "Oh, Elyn, you don't understand. These people are psychotic. They wouldn't experience restraints the way we would." And again, I didn't have the courage to tell them that I had experienced them and that indeed it's just as you or your family would have experienced it. But it was only by kind of, quote, othering us that you could feel okay about having done to people something you would never dream of wanting for yourself or your loved ones. A lot of times clinicians say that patients, or at least, many patients, value being in restraints. It makes them feel safe. Well, I have never met a patient who said anything remotely like that, and I get lots of inquiries and calls from patients, but of course I haven't surveyed the whole field, and there may be some people who do like them. And people say even if restraints don't make people feel safe, they keep them safe. But the reality is that each week it's either 1 to 3 or 3 to 5 people die in restraints. They aspirate their vomit, they strangle, they have heart attacks. So it's not really clear to me whether we're saving lives or costing lives by using restraints. There's a lot of evidence that how much they're used depends upon like the head of the ward or the head of the hospital and what his or her views are about this protocol. But it might be better to consult patients and caregivers, as well as the hospital staff who use restraints. In other words, we shouldn't use a top-down approach, but a bottom-up approach, or maybe both of them together would be best. Now in England, where I lived for a few years after college, they haven't used restraints for over 250 years. Perhaps British people are more respectful of authority than Americans are. Perhaps they're less violent. We actually have 20 times the homicide rate that they have, which is probably much driven by how much easier it is to get guns here than it is to get guns there. My own experience was horrible. When I was at Yale Hospital, I was restrained 20 hours a day for 2 days, and then 5 to 15 hours a day for the next 2 or 3 weeks. And my chart had this notation, quote, "Use restraints liberally," unquote. Of all the involuntary care I experienced, like involuntary hospitalization and involuntary or forcible medication, restraints were by far the most toxic, and I still have nightmares about them. And there are examples of places that have reduced or eliminated restraints in America. Matt talked about the experience at Emory, which is really wonderful and uplifting, and would love for them to do talks or train trainees about how to get along without restraints. There are two cases where there may be some limited use for them. So one would be you're in an ambulance going to the hospital and you might interfere with the driver, you're out of control. But then, restrain someone by one wrist. You don't have to tie them down at 4 points and put a net over them. And another example is where our doctors or nurses need to be by the patient at close quarters to talk and evaluate. But it seems to me that it might be better to have dangerous patients in seclusion and in some kind of box that you can talk through so you can have a conversation, but the person doesn't have to be put in restraints. So my recommendation would be to do our utmost to eliminate, or at the very least, lessen the use of restraints. Maybe we should send psychiatry fellows or psychiatry residents and psychologists to England to spend a semester there and see how they do it, or to the place at Emory where they've gotten rid of restraints. So in other words, upgrade the training that people are getting about how to use these things. In the end, I'd like to say that the way Matt Tuleja describes being treated is nothing short of scandalous and shameful, and that he and I, and I'm sure others treated in this way, stand tall together for change. Thank you.
It does continue on. We've got 3 minutes. Elyn speaks about a bit of a back and forth. We try our best to consolidate some of these conversations, and just due to time right now, I don't think that we're going to be able to play the entirety of our other interviewers who will be able to talk about Matt's personality and kind of their experience of mental health in the athletic space. I think, though, these are the more important pieces, and if you're interested in hearing what Coach Waldron had to say or what Andy and Isabella had to say, you can easily find those online. We'll be able to reach out with those videos if you contact us. I think they're quite interesting. We have full-length interviews. At this time, I believe that Matt may have something more he wants to say, just about a minute, and then we'll open up to questions. Again, it's a journey here, and we really appreciate all of you for being here and really going through this experience with us. Hopefully you walked away with something. Thank you.
The tech team's camera cut out during the call to action that I offered at the end of our talk. What I said was that my providers got it very wrong with me. And we can't go back, but we can look at this issue in psychiatry for what it is and offer a patient-centered call to action for change. To do so, I'd like to channel how me and many people like me feel. First, I feel guilt. I feel guilt because Matt's mission isn't about Matt. I'm one of many people who've experienced deleterious issues and abuses like I described to you today. I call to equitably incorporate voices of those with lived experience into our process to eradicate these practices. Structural violence has no place in psychiatry, and it's going to take listening to voices of people like me to achieve realization of that. Secondly, I feel sadness. My advocacy has caused me to meet so many people who are deprived from being who they can be or sustaining their best brain health because of irrational and oppressive mechanisms. Something's clearly missing. We can make some steps right away to cut back on abuses like I described to you today. One of which is the standardization of trauma-informed care through and through. Seclusion and restraint is not that. Trauma-informed care is defined as understanding that people's externalizing behaviors of emotional dysregulation and crisis are driven by a profound place of fear, hurt, and mistrust. So when you deal with somebody who's dysregulated, that information is key. When you're searching for strength to get it right and de-escalate, think about all the things that led them to that moment of crisis. Their dysregulation is a cry for help, not necessarily something that makes them dangerous, and certainly not something that in any situation warrants force. Rather, it warrants compassion exploring, and understanding. We need better leaders in the field. I hope you sincerely consider my story and so many stories like mine. I hope you channel that trauma into a power source to choose human dignity in moments of crisis. Thank you. Since the most successful people in history were those who were most able to improvise and collaborate, I'd like to give the mic to a former coach and a former teammate in Waldron, the offensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears, and Isabella, a wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills, to offer their perspectives as a coach and a teammate while navigating these experiences. Thank you.
Well, Matt and I first got a chance to know each other when I was a football coach at University of Massachusetts, and he was a player. He had transferred over from Assumption and was working his way into becoming a Division I player, and so we were excited about it. And had a good relationship with his high school coach, and had a good history of where Matt had been, and a light understanding of maybe what he had gone through. But then we were able to, have him part of the team in 2014. He played a pivotal role as a fullback for us. And, after that, had a, like I said, a little bit of an understanding of some of the mental health struggles that he was dealing with. And at that point in time, the best thing that I could provide, or that we could provide as coaches, was just trying to show that ability to listen and welcome him with open arms. But after that first season, then he went through some real struggles there. After that, I had left to pursue another job. But then that's where the relationship between Matt and I felt like got to different depths. Started to talk with him, a couple times a year, and each one of those talks we're still talking about, what was he going to do next? What was his future? But then as the conversations went on, then I felt like, became a good sounding board for him and provide that opportunity to listen to what he was going through. And I really think that's really when I started to understand the true depths and levels of some of the issues that he was dealing with. And, for me as a coach, it's something that's really helped to open my eyes and to really understand, where everyone has, different, external toughness and external things that they can show to the world. Their internal struggles really have, nothing to do with what they're providing to us on the outside. And so, hearing what Matt went through in his attempt to really rejoin the program, get back into a positive state within the university, was really pretty unbelievable as I got to hear him tell his story. And like I said, this is something that took, I would say, I'd defer to Matt on this, I'd say several years before, really hearing about some of the depths and details of the things that he was going through outside of, the areas that I was able to see him and be around him every single day. One thing in the space that I'm working is there's the assumption of strength, because you're around guys that are, from a physical standpoint, they're physically gifted, they're hardworking, they're doing everything kind of at the pinnacle of that area in life. And so you assume that everything else around them is a-okay because they come in the building, their physical presence, their attitudes are generally, ready to attack the next thing. But what I've really found, especially over the last few years, and this is where I think for me personally, my interactions with Matt has really helped me, embrace this with an open mind and a really, open thought process to how to help the guys. But around the NFL, and there's been to me a big shift in having a team of people that are there for the players. I think as a coach, we want to provide that platform where everyone's going to be open to us all the time. I think the different players want to feel that same way with friendships as well. But I also think the reality is, it's no different than parents or siblings, right? You're not always going to be willing to share some of the internal struggles you're going through with those people. So I think, having this shift and having a mental health specialist or having people that are in the building where I'm at now, or where the last few stops I've been a part of, where they've created that true separation of the sports world or the football part of it with a person that they can speak with about any mental health issues or anything that's going on. And I also think the combination of that and players, younger players as generations come up, are more willing to be open and honest and talk about it and try to take away some of any of the preconceived notions that might have gone, attached to mental health in the past. And so I think the combination of all those things has, not led us to a perfect point yet, but definitely an area that I've felt as I've been around the game of football now, nearly 20 years of coaching, it has become more and more at the forefront. And I feel like the resources have improved every year. And, the understanding, like everything has a long way to go, and to making sure that we're all in the right place. But, I do feel it trending in the right direction, and the open-mindedness of it is really shown in the different places I've been through in the last few years. That people might not realize outside of the professional sports world, it is a business like every business that's around the country, but it's a relationship-based business. And so I think, the more as a coach that we can provide that opportunity to truly develop relationships with all the individuals that we work with every single day. And that includes like the different coaches on the staff. It's not a place where you just kind of come to work in the morning, clock in, and then clock out in the afternoon and leave all your problems behind. I think it's a place where you end up spending a lot of time together. In certain instances, there's the external forces and the pressures that can come with the game. And so the more and more that you can develop that relationship outside of just, hey, I'm a teacher, that's the backbone of coaching, but also, I'm also a mentor. I'm a person that can provide a platform to talk about life, what's going on outside the building, really understanding the people and the players, that there are so many guys that football is just a part of their being, but, a majority of what they are is what's going on outside the building, where they've come from, what obstacles they've overcome, all the different parts of life that they've experienced. I think when you are able to develop a true relationship with the people that you're working with, I think then when there are things that are tough, or there are difficult times or difficult decisions, then those people are more open to wanting to discuss those with you. And like I mentioned earlier, even if they're not totally open to discuss them with you, they might be more willing to say, ask you, hey, is there something that I could do, or someone that I could talk to, and they could help me out with this. I know different players obviously have some different causes or things that they will back. But for us, it comes down to, we have 2 mental health specialists in the building, and they're really able to provide a platform for those guys to go talk and talk through things with. And that's really our main avenue. I think the biggest thing that we learn, at least in football, is with the range of people that we deal with every single day, that every single person is their own individual. And there are no 2 cases that are the same. There's no 2 people that are the same. Every day we're working with young men that are 21 to last year we had a 41-year-old player. So, you have different family setups, you have different backgrounds. We'll go around. We just did it this past week where we had everyone in smaller groups, and we do this a lot where we break into smaller group settings and tell us something that they had to overcome in life, and the amount of things that you're able to really hear and listen and find out about different individuals. We finish up with the group that I was in, it was about 10 people, and you realize you just heard 10 stories that were totally unique, and they were all one-of-ones. So I think when you're dealing with cases like Matt's or dealing with any of the mental health issues, it's just understanding that every single one of them maybe isn't a group of case studies, that it's all an individual case study, and that there might be some parts of one area that helps with this, but most likely every single one of them is going to require its own individual care. The different players that I've been around that have had different mental health issues, the biggest thing and the best platform that I feel like that's been there now is that ability to talk to people. And I think again, and I don't know the depths, and I won't go into the depths of different guys, but the ability to talk to people early and have an understanding of things early, I think has generated a vast improvement in that, because people aren't holding things in for years and years. Because I do feel like it's become more acceptable for someone to go talk to a specialist. And like I said, we're fortunate enough to have specialists that are right there, and the access is unbelievable. And obviously the goal would be, you know, how do you find that same access, or that same uh, you know, feeling free to go and talk to somebody, you know, in a broader sense than just you know, the bubble that I happen to be in right now. Guys have been more open around it, and I've talked to some guys about different things they're going through, and they feel okay talking about it now, which I know has not been the case historically. So I do think, you know, when stuff was uh, going well that year, I thought, you know, easily accepted and one of the guys. But, you know, also the reality is, you know, when people know that there's something there that they don't really know about, there's always going to be a fear and a, you know, wondering of, you know, what's next. And I think, you know, that's going to be part of everything we deal with the unknown, and getting more and more open and accepting to everything that goes on. But that to me would be the key to that 2014 year, was seeing the structure and seeing the positive impact it had on your life, but then also that huge, you know, question mark of what happens when, you know, this structure isn't around. What happens when, you know, the next step isn't perfect? You know, how do we help? And to me, that's where, from my end and from the, you know, your friends that were on the team and how they looked at you, like that's where it turns to, okay, what's the next place that we can direct you to have the help that you need? Which that was a huge unknown, and obviously it went, you know, in the wrong direction over the next, you know, several years from there. You know, when you're around everyone in a game, like the game of football, you know, your performance and being one of the guys that, you know, that's where you can have people with all different things going on that are able to come together in a locker room setting and do all the right things. But when it comes to the point of having to step away and transition, well, now that opens you up to the big unknown of, you know, in everybody's individual mind. And just like we talk about, everyone's got individual issues, you know, there's, now you're talking about, you're discussing something with 100 or so people, that every single one of those people in that room probably have a little different opinion, you know, and they don't, and some of it is, you know, none of them are right or wrong. They're all just totally unknown, and they're trying to figure out how to come to grips with it themselves, and how they want to handle being around you. And I think, you know, the more everyone else, not just the person that's going through it, the more everyone else really understands, that allows them to embrace and help, rather than to be scared and, you know, back away a little bit. And in your case too, like when there's clear and open and honest communication, which, you know, we tried the best to have that happen, when you're able to be the one verbally telling people what's going on, you know, that also, you know, gets a group a lot more willing to be, you know, or create, you know, takes down that barrier of the what if, or what's going on, or the, you know, where there's silence, people fill that silence with their opinions that might not be based on anything. And so when you're able to get right out in the front of it there, and again, that's the, you know, a fortunate thing in athletics, where there is a little bit more willingness to just get up in front of the group and keep everyone in the loop of what's going on. I appreciate it, Matt. Love you, man. And I know your story, again, it's about what the future looks like, and how we can continue to grow and adapt and be better people. So I think you're going to be a trailblazer in that regard. And the more your story gets out, and be there backing you up, man.
I met Matt. He came in, just for me, he was just another guy coming on the team. He came on the team a little bit later, and there's a lot of people. I didn't really know his whole story, and I don't think the coaches did a good enough job explaining the situation with the mental health stuff, and the situation that he had going on. And for me, it felt like guys on the team didn't give him a fair shot of maybe telling his story of what happened. Because I had been there for 3 years, so I mean, Matt was coming in as kind of like a new player, like a new face, and kind of like the middle of the season. Um, and guys were definitely giving him a hard time. And if I was in his shoes, I mean, I can't imagine the challenges that he was going through, trying to come back, struggling with the school system, trying to get even meals. I mean, we kind of bonded when Matt came in, and we would go to the dining hall together because I had the extra swipes on my dining hall pass, and I remember he would come with me to the dining hall, and he would kind of share a story here and there, but I wasn't really fully understanding what was going on. And there's guys on the team that were giving him a hard time, and I felt like in that situation, the school needed to do a better job of, first of all, helping Matt adjust back to UMass and into the football program, and it kind of maybe even guide him along the way and help him make that transition back into kind of going to school and playing football and dealing with all that stuff, because it's hard. It's when you're playing football, you're going to school. It's challenging on the mental and on the mind, and just staying level and staying on the grind day to day. It's definitely not easy, and especially when you're in Matt's shoes, coming back the way he was. I mean, I can speak a little to I didn't have a situation like Matt, but I've been to places in the NFL where I've been cut and had to go to training camp in the middle of camp, and guys are looking at you like, who is this guy coming in? And it's definitely not easy transition. And Matt had all that other stuff going on, plus a couple teammates that had stories about Matt that weren't really lined up, and were spreading false rumors and causing other guys on the team to maybe look at him a different way. But for me, Matt was coming in as a teammate and someone that was going to try to help us win. And it didn't matter who he was and what he was going through. I was going to my thing was like, I was going to help him no matter what, or he was my teammate. But I think the coaches could have done a better job of helping Matt transition, even though it was the middle of the season, and maybe even bringing him up into the front of the room and be like, hey, this Matt, this is his story, and he's going to help us win, and we want to help. Everyone's going to do their part in helping him get on board with us and bring him to. So that's kind of my story with Matt, and that's how we met, and we've kind of stayed friends over the years. And I've learned his whole story now, and what an inspiration he is to me. And I think if people would have known his story, he would have been even a bigger inspiration to everyone on that football team that year, and even pushed us to even play even harder and work with each other even a little better. So that's my story of meeting Matt and kind of our journey together, and where we're at to this point.
Sure. The coaching staff didn't necessarily know what I went through, and I think part of that is because there was a lot of shame attached to being coerced and isolated and tortured and traumatized, and not knowing what happened to you per se. And then it makes sense now when you have a trauma-informed lens, and I think that's critical. But there was moments that I was still wearing my trauma, meaning there was a moment against BYU, for example, that Andy referenced, where like coach put me in like out at receiver or something to block. It was like just part of his offense in terms of hurry up. And I went and I, blocked a D-back, and instead of it just being a go back to the huddle kind of thing, he was like, white boy, whatever, which is part of the game. And I'm usually like, yeah, go back to the huddle. Don't think twice about that. That would be mentally weak. But in that moment, and in other moments that I can think of during that time period, which was a 6-week time period, so a very short time period where I was clearly uncharacteristically not not okay. I snapped on the kid. Like, I bumped face masks and blah, 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 and then they threw a 15-yard personal foul flag, and Coach Whip was like as red as a lobster. Yeah, I gotta stick my neck out for you on a right mouth, that kind of thing. And it wasn't until years later, meaning 2021, when I finally talked to a good trauma-informed therapist. They were like, well, the coach, he ripped you because he thought you overreacted. But if he knew that uh, your brain wasn't just responding to that young D-back who talks crap because that's how he gets by, but it was responding to that young D-back and those 9 security guards that your brain's still holding on to, he would have seen that at least physiologically you underreacted. And that resonated with me more than anything, in that I was still holding on a mind-body level the experience that happened to me, and it affected me, and it affected my community and the perception of me. Um, and so there's two issues here. One's the optics and the team, and how do you see mental health, and then the other issue is being able to treat trauma and all the work that goes into overcoming that so that you can be your best self again.
Thank you for your story. I love your story, Matt, and I love you too. So I appreciate you taking that time to say all that. I want to shift back to Andy's story in relation to everything you're going through, or everything that you went through here. And I think that one of the topics that we talked about is how individuals' biases as they walk into these spaces are going to shape the way they interact with you. So, we've spoken personally about how, Matt's appearance or perhaps notes about Matt may have shaped some of the behavior that was targeted towards him. And for you, Andy, what I'm really curious about, as somebody who is, frequently surrounded by larger men, frequently surrounded by men who have an expectation of being aggressive, or are really expected to be more physical than most. I mean, you're athletes, right? Did you ever feel the impression of almost an imposing presence by Matt, or a threatening presence by Matt? And how do you speak to shifting your fears, I guess, away from being in protective mode when you're around physically larger individuals or people that may pose a threat in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an awesome question, because I think that was an issue that a lot of maybe guys had, because Matt's a big, strong. I mean, he's a fullback. I mean, I'm a small wide receiver, so at times Matt was intimidating. I mean, if I see Matt on the streets, I mean, we rolled a little in jiu-jitsu. I mean, I'm not trying to. We did a little Muay Thai together. I'm not trying. I'm running the other way. But I see how that kind of played maybe a little bit of role in how guys kind of saw Matt when he came in back into the building, and it was hard for maybe guys to open up and kind of help Matt along the way, because maybe they were a little intimidated by him. But I mean, I was raised by a really good family and great faith, and was taught to treat everyone how you would want to be treated. And so it was no problem. Matt was my teammate. He was my brother, even though I didn't really know him. I have a trust in people, and so when Matt needed to get in the dining hall to get food, I had no problem using my extra swipes to get him in, because he was my teammate. He was my brother. He was someone that's how I looked at him. And even though he was maybe a little, he was definitely intimidating to me, because I mean, he was older than me. He was way stronger than me, bigger than me. But I mean, I accepted him. I knew, I kind of could tell that he meant the best, and he wanted the best for himself and for the people around him. And I kind of saw that, and I trusted that. And it was fun watching him. I think his first opportunity was to play against BYU and get that opportunity to play. But I think that is definitely something that guys, when he first came in, been a little bit intimidated. And I think the coaches and the staff could have done a better job of helping us understand the situation and what was really going on, and trying to tell us that, hey, Matt's here to help us win. He's our new teammate. We're here to be accepting of whoever's coming in here, and let's help each other and motivate each other, and just all love each other, and get on the same page. So I think there was a little misconception of, or a misunderstanding of the situation that was going on, and there's a lot of rumors going around, and rumors are never good.
With last thoughts, do you have any recommendations for the world of psychiatry following this discussion?
Well, I mean, my biggest thing is just to really get to know somebody and really understand where they're coming from instead of trying to prescribe something for them, and really trying to understand what someone's going through. I mean, I have my uncle, he went through some mental health stuff, and they would take him to the mental hospital, and they would tell him there's nothing wrong with you if you maybe just take this antidepressant or something that kind of suppresses maybe those feelings or emotions, instead of like seeing what's the really root cause of what's going on, and helping that person work through the root cause of what's going on, instead of just treating the symptoms. And
Do you have
really
time for one more question? It might be a quick.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're involved in this initiative. It's awesome that you are. We need folks that are going to be pushing for reform in psychiatry. We need people that are going to be pushing the industry forward. Are you, or any of the teams you're affiliated with, are they formally involved with any other initiatives to improve mental health?
With the team I'm on now, the Buffalo Bills, we have I guess you could say a team psychiatrist, and I'm not sure if they're involved in any programs per se for mental health. I think that's something they could do a little better, is maybe bring in more people in to talk about that, and strategies to deal with symptoms. But they do offer things as optional for players to go to every week, and bond together and get to know each other, and kind of help each other kind of understand what's going on with each other, and so that we could trust each other and make for a better, healthy work environment, so that maybe other players can see something when something's wrong or something's off. Someone sees that right away and is aware of that, and can kind of nip it in the butt before it gets out of control, maybe to the point where it happens, unfortunately, with Matt, the situation that he had. If we're more situationally aware of what's going on, we could prevent situations like Matt from occurring.